Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurick, the #1 sought-after authority on RFP success. So every week, we're bringing you information, strategies, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and have a little fun doing it. So let's go ahead and get this week's episode started. Today's guest is Donna Warrick, president of Jamesson Solutions. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you, Lisa. Happy to be here.
So happy to have you. Before we get into the topic and what we're going to talk about, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is you do?
Sure. I own a company called Jamesson Solutions, as you mentioned, and it is a leadership development, talent management, and selection organization. So in a nutshell, we work with human beings. We help human beings be better at things like leading, communicating, giving presentations, all of those things that are important. We work with human behavior, and it's a lot of fun. I love doing it. We've been doing it for a long time, and it is truly my passion, helping people realize the wonderful abilities they have, the power that they hold, helping them create that awareness.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is because you are so passionate, and you and I have gotten into conversations before, and we could chat for hours and hours on end. But one of the big reasons that I wanted to have you on the show is because when we're managing RFP responses, so my guests are mostly people that are in the RFP world, right? When we're managing RFP responses, we're having to deal with people dynamics all over the place. We're having to obviously deal with people dynamics and how we're writing our proposal, but also internally on the team, on the proposal team, there are all sorts of dynamics. Usually the person that is managing the response that needs to influence and get things from people is a level lower or 2 levels lower than the people that they're having to herd in order to get stuff. So that's one reason. And then the other reason is that you have so much information around change management. And a lot of times proposal teams and our organizations really struggle to change when things aren't working, when they're not making a lot of wins, when they've got to change the process or whatever that looks like. They tend to be really hesitant to change. So we're going to be talking about all of that stuff in these 2 episodes. This is going to be such a great conversation that we're splitting this into 2 episodes. So I'm excited to get started. So here's what I want to do. I want to kick off our conversation with just one of the big things that my folks struggle with, which is managing people that are not within our control. So they don't have a direct reporting line. They might be a leader to them, a manager to them, but you still have to get what you need from them. So you've got to be a little bit assertive and direct and all that fun stuff. So with that, what are some thoughts that you have around a lower level person managing someone outside of their control? That's a big question, I know.
Yeah, it is. And it's one that I think a lot of people really struggle with just getting their heads around it.
Yeah.
Who am I to try to influence up and manage up? And there's a lot of moving parts with this. So first of all, what I would say is that it's really important that we recognize that we have more power than we think we do. That it has to be something where we have to put together a plan. We have to, it's sort of anything else you would do, in the business world. Let's build a plan around how we're going to do this, what we're going to execute, what are the things, what are our objectives, what do we want to get out of it, and then how do we manage this? And managing up is complex because at the end of the day, number one, you're trying to influence a decision. And I think where there gets to be some areas of confusion is when we think we need to influence that we can change a person. You can't change a person. So what if you can't change them? What do you have to do? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, you have to recognize that you need to be able to influence. And in order to influence, you have to understand what language that individual speaks when it comes to influence. So what I mean by that is each and every one of us have our own influence style. Some of us tend to be a little more assertive, and the way we tend to influence other people is through being very assertive. This is the way you're going to do it. I'm going to challenge you on everything. I'm going to use authority, that type of thing. Then there are other people who influence through creating the picture, the optimists, the painting, this is what it should look like. So they have this ability to sort of show the vision, and they're very optimistic. You have other styles that tend to be very data driven. They influence through facts, figures, data analysis. So your number one thing is I've got to figure out, if I'm trying to influence another individual, what is their style? How do they, when I watch them, how do they influence? So if I am dealing with someone who is really data driven, analytical, loves facts and figures, if I'm going to be able to exercise influence over them, I have to approach it in that style. So that means I'm going to have to build a business case. I'm going to have facts and data to back it up, reasons why, because now I'm speaking their language. Once I do that, then that individual will be more open to considering other points of view. This is why most people struggle with being able to influence effectively, because they don't, first of all, that we're not aware that everybody influences and likes to be influenced in different ways.
Yep.
Secondly, we're not aware of, well, if they want to be influenced differently, how do I do that? What does that look like? And so it makes it more of a challenge. But if we can be aware of this, and it's paying attention. What's your boss like? Are they assertive? Is that, or are they the big visionary that always comes and paints this picture of, here's all the possibilities and this is what it could look like? Whatever that style is, build your business case and influence in the way that they influence. You're going to go a lot further.
Yeah. And you know what I love about this is that, I think that somebody that's in a lower level than the person that they're having to influence feels intimidated.
Yes.
Right? There's this intimidation factor. And if you think about it more from an influence versus control, so I love that you're talking about that to me feels better, right? And I think for somebody that's maybe not assertive, that will feel better for them, and that it isn't a one size fits all. Because I also think people assume you've got to be assertive and direct, and not always, right? So what if somebody's really passive and introverted and they've got to influence somebody who's assertive and direct? Any tips for them? Because that's a pretty big gap to close.
Yeah, that's really taking someone out of their comfort zone. And the first thing I would say is get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because that's where you're going to be. And I think especially if you're part of an organization where it's a startup, or you work for an individual with a very entrepreneurial mindset, that you're constantly coming out of your comfort zone. So if you tend to be less assertive and you're going to have to step it up, which means number one, direct eye contact. Think about your body language. One of the best ways to look more assertive, even if you're not, that strong eye contact, that tone of voice that says I'm in command, sitting up nice and tall, chin high, shoulders a little broader, just physically expanding your space. And that really helps with being assertive. Leaning in when you're talking with the individual. All of these things say, I'm here, you need to pay attention to this, you need to listen to what it is I have to say. And it's those little things like that can help you come across as more assertive, even if that's not your natural style to be that way.
Yeah, and wouldn't you say too, is the person on the other end of that, You know,
Mhm.
yes, you're going to get your occasional jerk just because that's the way life is. But wouldn't you say that the person on the other end of that will be appreciative, especially if you're following along with their influence style? There, there's no reason that they would not be receptive, right?
Yeah, and I think because if we're not naturally that way, we struggle with being able to understand how that can be effective. But I'll
Mm.
give you an example. So my husband is on the DISC behavior style, which looks at the various behavior styles. He's a 100 out of 100 dominance. So he is extremely assertive, even aggressive in his style. And his influence style, because we actually have an assessment called the influence style indicator, where we can measure and look at, well, what is your own influence style? And we use that for our leadership development programs, coaching, etc. He is the assertive style as well. And so he really appreciates you being more assertive and being bold, challenging him, pushing back, challenging that traditional way of thinking, pushing back on what he says. So it's not arguing, it's more around debating and having that conversation. He For him, that is invigorating, it's fun, he enjoys it, he feels like that's the way to really have a good, meaningful conversation. But for someone like my daughter, who's a 20 dominance, she
Wow.
she's really uncomfortable with that. If you try to do that with her, the results won't be the same. She'll feel intimidated. She'll feel that she's being bullied. But if you're dealing with someone who's very assertive, then if you step up and be more assertive, you're speaking their language. They're all in. It's almost hey, we're going to have a great conversation here.
That's why I like your husband. Him
I
and I
know
can have
he works hard to tone it down, and
right. So has your daughter figured out how to influence him?
yeah, she's had to learn that she has to step up. I've actually coached her on her own body language. She actually, her boss is wired a lot like my husband. So it's been great for her to practice on dad in order to be
Yes.
more successful with her manager. And it's working for her really well. And on the flip side, my husband is also really aware that when he's trying to influence his daughter, that she is very analytical, data driven, and so he needs
Okay.
to come armed with the facts. And so it's been really good for both of them to recognize and understand what each person needs.
And this is life, right? I mean, and this isn't about, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is not about changing who you are. It's about adapting in the moment so that you can get what you need, not in a manipulative way, but in an influencing way, as you say.
You're exactly right. This isn't in any way diminishing or minimizing who we are. And in fact, every style, every behavior style is important, is good. There's no right or wrong when it comes to our style, whether it's the influence, how we influence, or how we are wired, behaviorally. It really is just being able, and I always say this is where the magic happens when I get to a place where I start to pay attention and recognize that, hey, this person, their style's different from mine. What can I do when I need to be of influence or when I need to communicate more effectively with that individual? What can I do to be more like them and adapt, like as you said, in that moment? Because if I do that, that person is going to be more receptive and open to the conversation. They're going to be more receptive and open to thinking about something differently.
Yeah.
And that's really where that magic starts to happen. And it's actually very empowering.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what's kind of funny is I'm thinking about this. I'm like, this is the third or fourth podcast I've done where we've talked about behavioral styles. I mean, and
Wow.
and that wasn't even by design. I knew that you and I would talk about it. But that's how important it is, you guys. Like this keeps weaving in and out of these conversations when we're talking about people management and people influence and any conflict management, which just my podcast that rolled out yesterday was all about conflict management. Same thing, we ended up coming back to behavioral styles because that's how we communicate, right? So how do I know what style you are? I might know what style I am. I can take your quiz, your assessment to figure it out. But how do I know what your style is?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So essentially, there's 5 styles that we look at, and you're going to see or recognize a style by the words that they use, by the things that are really important to them. For example, as I mentioned, my husband has the asserting style. So he wants to debate things. He wants to challenge ideas. He wants to be heard. He's going to insist that you hear him. So if I'm dealing with someone that in that description, then we know they tend to be more of that asserting style. My style is what is called inspiring. It's the style that I mentioned that loves to inspire, to talk about the possibilities, to share the vision. And typically someone who is more of that inspiring style, just the way they will communicate, they'll talk about the vision, the overall goal, how we're going to work together. And you'll start to hear that language, and then you'll say, oh, that person, they tend to be more inspiring. The other style I mentioned, which is my daughter's, is the rationalizing. It's around logic. It's around being rational, reasoning, data-driven. So you're going to hear language like the research that we've done, or logic would lend itself to, you'll hear logically speaking. You'll hear language like that.
And statistics, right? Like,
yes, they love statistics. Okay. They love having data, anything where you can back it up, the proof. There's 2 other styles. One is the negotiating style, and it's sort of you'll hear with this style, the person will want to make compromises. They sort of go into a conversation already sort of planning, here's what I'm going to give up if you'll give up something.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So the language that you'll hear is, well, look, I mean, we could do this, but in exchange, we would need, or they may use language similar to saying things like, well, we've got to be able to meet in the middle. So then, you've got that negotiating style. And then finally, the bridging. Bridging is where the bridging style is really neat to me, because it's all about, I want to build the relationship, and through the relationship, we're going to come to a common way of thinking, common ground. So they're all about the connection. And so for this style, the language would be something about, well, how can we do this together? What do you need from me? They're looking, or it could be that they're going to use language around, do I have your support on this? Because they're going around and building coalitions. So they're looking for who can I get on my team in order to influence. So as you start to hear, you have to pick up on the language and what are they, what are the things that they talk about? What do you hear in there? And the more you start to pay attention to that, the more you'll be able to pick up on the different styles. And then it's simply just adapting your language and your approach to that business case, to that objective that you want to, the outcome that you want to have.
Yeah, that it's so important, and it's so important to pay attention. You use that language, right? You've got to pay attention. You might have to slow down a little bit, but it's going to help you in the long run to get what you need. And I don't think any organization anymore really works in that perfectly hierarchical sense, in that, this leader does top down and nobody else ever has to influence around. So this is really, really great info. I want to circle back because you said something at the beginning of the call that I want to get clarification on. What would you say the difference between control and influence is?
That's great. So I think, so for me, and the way we approach this is control is not, the way I describe it is fixed versus growth mindset. It's a mindset, right? So control is, I'm very fixed. We're going to do it this way. It's fear, it's
Mm.
ego, it's the need to be right, and it is the fear of being wrong. It's the fear of things not going well. I need to control it so that I'm safe. So I have this, and you know what's so interesting? We talk often in our leadership programs about fixed versus growth mindset. And we use this example called above the line, below the line. And I simply just draw a line across a board. And everybody has a choice, right? So we can be above the line, which means that we are curious, we listen to other points of view, we're committed to learning new things, we're open. And when you're sort of operating above the line, then you are you're willing to give up that control. And if you're
Nice.
operating from a space of above the line, you have a better ability to influence. People who operate below the line, they focus on, I call it the not enough condition. There's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough of other resources, and it's everybody else's to blame. I'm right, they're wrong. And so we get defensive and we have this need to be right. And as a result, what happens, because we're living out of fear and we're operating that way, we feel the need to control.
Mm.
If you're operating below the line, you cannot influence. So in order to influence, you have to be willing to put your ego aside. You have to be willing to have more of what we call the growth mindset, which means that I'm willing to consider all points of view. Okay. I am going to adapt my interactions, my behaviors with that person that I'm trying to manage up or influence, because they're not going to change. It's up to
Yeah.
me. So I think that's, so that's a long-winded way of getting back to what's the difference between being closed and being able to influence. But I really think it comes down to that. And, what's so fascinating, again, I always talk about, I work with human beings, our human brain, we are conditioned to be operating always below the line. It literally goes back to the days of the caveman when we were having that fight versus flight. And in fact, you may have, when you talked about conflict management, even talked about a little bit about this, but we have this thing in our brain called the amygdala. And it's the part of our brain that was first developed. And basically we would look at something and say, are they going to eat me or can I eat them? So we either fought it and ate it, or we ran away. And what happens is that as a result of that, because we're so wired to be that way, we live and operate below the line because our brain can't determine the difference between threats. Is it a physical threat? Is it a threat to my ego? Because the reasoning part of our brain in the very beginning sort of shuts down, right?
Yeah.
So that's why oftentimes I tell people, look, this takes work, but you have to, in any situation, you have to stop and ask yourself, where am I? Am I operating above the line or am I operating below? And if I
Wow.
feel threatened, if I'm playing the blame game, if I'm trying to control something, I know exactly where I am. Now, what can I do to move and shift and get above the line?
That's some seriously great self-awareness there, right? To
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
thinking about that. And so if you're dealing with somebody though that, like, okay, you're aware of this, you move yourself into operating above the line, how do you deal with somebody that's operating below the line?
Yeah. So it's a challenge, right? And you are always going to encounter people who seem entrenched and
Mm.
fixed below the line. And the thing that you can do, it goes back to recognizing, being able to recognize their style, adapt, have some patience. I tell people all the time, change is like turning the Queen Mary with the teaspoon. It takes a long time and it's really hard, but you can do it. You just
Yeah.
have to be committed. And so you may have to try different approaches. And just because you go and try something one time and it doesn't quite work out the way you wanted, maybe you didn't get the response you wanted, doesn't mean that you don't go back and try it again or change it, tweak it a little bit. But you are always going to be interacting with people
Yeah.
who stay below. And you only have so much that you can control and only so much that you can influence. You can control your own actions. You can control your own mindset, and you can influence. And as I mentioned earlier, the better you understand that person's style and the better you can adapt, the more influence you will have. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to change everyone's minds or hearts. But you won't ever know until you try it.
Yeah, that's, and it's so, as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, I'm thinking about how even the knowledge of understanding that we start below the line, right?
Mhm.
Not everybody's aware enough, self-aware enough to pull themselves above the line, that in the combination of learning how to adapt to somebody else's style, but also understanding that they are maybe trying to hold on to control, or they're living in fear or ego. To me, ego comes from fear,
It
right?
is.
That it's not about this person being an asshole. It's
Right.
just about them being fearful of something. To me, it puts like a human hat on them, and it allows me to more easily move through that instead of run away from it. Like, holy crap, I'm scared to death of this person. Instead, being able to put a human, just kind of a human bent on them that makes it easier to deal with them. So
Yeah.
that's really powerful information.
And I truly believe that most people don't wake up every morning and say, who am I going to be an asshole to today? How am I going
Right.
to be miserable? Right.
Yep.
Because people don't operate that way. One of the things that we talk about a lot too when we talk about emotional intelligence and self-awareness is that there really are only two true emotions, and that's fear and love. And you choose to
Mm,
operate either out of fear or out of love. And all the other emotions are sort of subcomponents of one of those two. And so if you're operating out of fear, it can be a real challenge. It's a struggle to be open to another person's point of view, and it's a struggle to let go. It's a struggle to have, you can't have that growth mindset. And this to me is really near and dear, because all businesses today, I don't care what industry you're in or what you're doing, we're all being challenged with having to be more agile and flexible
yeah.
and more innovative. Just by technology alone forces us to continue to change. And when you're thinking about that concept of, gosh, if I'm going to be relevant in today's business, I have to operate from a growth mindset. I can't, um, I can't not be willing to look at things differently. I can't not be willing to consider another point of view, or be willing to accept that maybe the way it used to be is not the way it should be now.
Yeah.
And so, I tell people all the time, look, number one, role model it. Be the person that operates above the line. Be the person that has the growth mindset. Be the person that's willing to listen and willing to consider other points of view. People will recognize that. They may not be able to put a specific name to it, but they will recognize that it's different and that it's good, and that's actually where they want to be. And even if you're not right off the bat being successful at getting what you want,